Okay. Warm greetings to all present from the St. Stephen's Northeast Society. Today we will be in conversation with Dr. Arkotong Longkumer on Hindutva and the Northeast. Dr. Arkotong Longkumer is a lecturer of religious studies at the School of Divinity, University of Edinburgh, and a senior fellow at Koima Institute in Nagaland. He has done his fieldwork on the Harakaalak movement among the Zeme Nagas, a Naga tribe that lives primarily in the three states of Manipur, Nagaland, and Assam. This indigenous movement emerged as a revolt against the arrival of Christian missionaries and consequently great socio-cultural changes. Dr. Longkumer has written extensively on the northeast region of India. For this discussion, we will be discussing primarily on his book, Hindutva and the Northeast. We will be talking about how Hindutva forces try to bring the Northeast and its leaders like Rani Gaindulu into their fold as part of the nation building project. Some guidelines for the meeting. Attendees are requested to keep their mics muted when not speaking so as to create a disruption-free session. If you have any questions, you can interject whenever, or you can put them in the chat box below and we will direct them to the speaker. Having said thus, we start the session for this afternoon. Hello, Dr. Longkumer. It's a pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. Can you talk about your book for those who have not read it, and also tell us how you came to write such a book?
Okay, yeah. Good morning, everybody. Well, I mean, like morning in the UK. I'm sure it's afternoon in India, like for you all now. And it must be getting hotter kind of as well. So, yeah, it's great to be here and to be part of this conversation. Good question about the book and also the introduction, I think, because the introduction gives a sense of where my research started actually. And I think a lot of the seeds for the current book, which you might have seen, it's called the Greater India Experiment, Hindutva and the Northeast. I try and build on some of the work that I've done during my PhD and my first book, looking primarily at the Harakaalak movement. And of course, the Harakaalak movement is a movement which you may be familiar with. And it's a movement that started primarily in the Zilangrong areas of Assam, Manipur, as well as Nagaland. And it's associated with, of course, Rani Gaidindu, but also Jadanong. So I mean, these were important figures in the in the history of the region, which somehow has been sort of suppressed, I think, especially when we think about Northeast history or from Naga history. We tend to talk primarily about say FISO and the NNC, or that kind of angle is more important. The Christian angle is more important, and the non-Christians are kind of suppressed. So I think in that sense, I was trying to revive an understanding of who Rani Gaidindu is and the movement that she started called the Harakaalak Movement. So while I was doing my long-term ethnographic fieldwork in the NC Hills, now it's called the Mahasau, I came across a lot of the Sangh Parivar activists, so RSS, VHP, Kalyan Ashram workers, and they were really kind of invested in working in say remote tribal areas. So the first group of the Sangh Parivar that I met were actually VHP school teachers, and these school teachers were primarily situated in this village just close to Lysong in eastern NC Hills, and they had started a school called the Vishwa Hindu Parishad School. And these teachers were primarily from Orissa and other places, but not from the Northeast. So I was really struck as to why these people would invest their time and kind of motivate themselves to come to these kind of areas, the tribal areas, to actually work with indigenous populations that culturally, politically, physically, as well as according to like dietary practices are very different. So these guys were primarily like vegetarians, but they were living in an area where well, like hunting was quite popular, like meat was like consumed. So, and of course alcohol was also like consumed, and these strict kind of like Brahmanical caste kind of like structures were being kind of disrupted, in the like frontiers of the Indian state. So what really struck me was their kind of motivation and their investment in kind of nation building. So once I got kind of introduced to them, then I started to dig a bit more and find out a bit more about their activities. Now, the Sangh Parivar, as you might know, is a like family of associations, right? So they comprise of the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the like VHP, the Kalyan Ashram, Vidya Bharati, and all of these affiliates are there, right? And you can find the Sangh Parivar like working in education, in economy, in social and political issues. Of course, the BJP is a part of it. And so the Sangh Parivar is actually a huge organization. And of course, Hindutva is the other term that you might be familiar with because in the news everywhere is Hindutva, right, in India. And so in that sense, so I mean, Hindutva, the principle of Hindutva is Hinduness, okay? And how do we construct the sense of Hinduness is the primary question. And this question of Hinduness goes down to certain key characteristics. So, like for example, traditionally there was Hindi, kind of like Hindi, Hindu, Hindustan. Okay, so the Hindi language was important, your identity as a Hindu, and the country, which is Hindustan, was kind of important. And that was the central ideology. And they spread that all over the region, from the south of India to the east of India, and then gradually to the like northeast of India. Now, the northeast of India is quite interesting, primarily because, as all of you like know, culturally is very different. It's not Indic. Parts of Assam are, but generally, the cultural makeup is Tibeto-Burman, okay, Himalayan, like Mon Khmer. So, and Shan, okay, so the influences from like Burma, from the Eastern Himalayas, from up towards like Bangladesh, that makes this region quite an interesting place culturally because it's non-Indic, and people often express themselves as I mean, people find it quite difficult to say that I'm Indian. And I think that sentiment may be changing, but traditionally, at least, people would identify with their tribal group. So I'm like Mizo, or I'm Naga, or I'm Khasi, I'm Garo, and so on, right? So these tribal identities were more important than your larger pan-national identity. And coupled with all of that, we have different like nationalist movements that have questioned this idea of India and have resisted being a part of the Indian Republic. So you have the NNC, you have the like Mizo National Front, like you have the ULFA, and you have so many other groups in all over like Manipur, say Meghalaya, and all of that, fighting for some kind of autonomy, some kind of sovereignty from the Indian state. So you have these different fragmented like movements, in the like northeast of India, and they are coming together with a very singular kind of identity. Okay, singular Hindutva identity coming to this region to confront the multiple kind of identities all over the region, and that's where the challenge is. The kind of encounter is where the creativity happens, the innovation happens, the flexibility happens. So Hindutva actors are really aware of all of these histories. I mean, they're not blind to it, and because they're aware of these different histories, then they have to confront and encounter a place where people may not like the idea of India or may not want to be associated with Indian, but yet they are here working to convince the people that they are in fact Indian, or they are in fact Hindu, or they are in fact a part of the Hindu like Rashtra, okay, the Hindu like state. So how do people negotiate that, is something that the book is trying to untangle and is trying to really look at. So the book is kind of ethnographic in approach. I have done a lot of field work, with the Sang Parivar. I mean, it's not that I'm just this helicopter like journalist, as they like to call it. You go down, you extract the news, and then you go out, and then you sensationalize it, you kind of write it. And I think a lot of the Sang Parivar activists were very wary of journalists, and because of my association with the Haraka, and because of the fact that I had contacts on the ground, they were willing to talk to me. And it was a long-term investment of my time, their time as well. And the thing that I do in the book is that, I treat them seriously. So, I mean, I attempt to really understand their point of view. Okay. I'm not there in the field judging them or kind of dismissing them as, oh, I mean, you guys are like useless, or I mean, you guys are, here to like ruin like Northeast India. No, my intentions were primarily as neutral as possible, and I was observing and I was interviewing them, I was interacting with them to try and understand their kind of modus like operandi. How do they work? What motivates the people to come, from like Gujarat, from say like Rajasthan, from like UP, to give up their kind of dietary practices of say like vegetarianism and start taking up meat, drinking rice beer. So so all of these questions are quite central to how we think about people who are invested in something. Okay, so I mean, it could be a political party. I mean, it could be the Communist Party of India, or I mean, it could be the Congress, or it could be the like BJP. People are invested in something bigger than the party. They're invested in this idea. Okay, and here the book really tries to look at this idea of the Greater India experiment. And so I'll just say a quick few like words about this, and I'll open it up to kind of discussion. But the Greater India experiment is primarily the idea that the current territorial, say like makeup of the Indian state is very limited. The Greater India kind of envisions this idea of kind of India spreading from Afghanistan, Pakistan, covering all of the Himalayas, possibly Tibet, going on to like Mongolia, and then coming down towards like Northeast Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Indonesia, like Malaysia, like Burma, cultural influences in Thailand, like Vietnam, and so on, right? So it's a huge expanse, okay? And you would see this often in the like maps in the RSS and the like VHP schools, in the hostels as well. And this big map will be presented of like Greater India. Now, their argument is that if all of these areas, if the entire Himalaya is encompassed within this imagination of Greater India, then surely the Northeast has to be a part of it, right? You can't exclude such a big like landmass out of it. And for them, the center of this Greater India is the Northeast of India. That is the center. Okay, it's not Delhi, or it's not Lahore, or kind of Islamabad, or it's not Rangoon. It's the Northeast, and primarily Assam is the kind of like center of this. And so their argument is that this is the place where the Indic, the Himalayan, the Tibeto, like Burman, okay, they come together. And this is the place where a lot of productive conversations, a lot of productive coming together of different cultures can actually have a conversation. And that is why the Northeast is very, very central to their activities and their imagination. And the book tries to capture all of this. It tries to look at the kind of ideology of Hindutva and how it comes to the like Northeast and what are its central ideas and how does it fit in with the this like region called the like Northeast. I mean, I am a bit embarrassed to say like Northeast all the time because I am aware that the like Northeast is so diverse itself. And I think sometimes we do a disservice by saying like Northeast, as if, it's this like one entity, but of course it's not. But the term like Northeast is of course used by the Sangh Parivar. They see it as one province or one kind of like region, and they have to target that one province. So from the way they place or they make place, so how do they construct the like Northeast as part of their Indic imagination when for so many years the like region has been saying that we are not a part of India, right? So they take into account like myths, like stories. They draw on the like Mahabharata to say that the kind of Northeast was part and parcel of this kind of imagination for thousands and thousands of years. And they also have say like figures like Rukmini and Krishna, the story of like Rukmini and Krishna, and they say that like Rukmini was an Arunachali girl, and Krishna came all the way from like Gujarat, took like Rukmini from Arunachal, and then so I mean all of these stories are about place making. Yeah, and then I also talk about elections. I talk about the like BJP elections in the like Northeast and their successes, in Assam and then in Tripura, and then how they play politics in say like Manipur, say like Nagaland, not so much like Mizoram, because when I was writing the book, the elections were just happening, I think, and then Arunachal and then like Meghalaya. So I kind of like look at the way the like BJP has been able to play the politics of locality, okay, by um, by like making alliances with different like regional parties, while at the same time really kind of espousing their idea of the national party with the like regional outlook. So all of these activities sort of make up their strategy, their ideology, which is a long-term investment. I mean, it's not a 10-year project for them; it's a 100-year project. So I look at the different ways in which they're operating, and this book kind of highlights that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Longkumer, for that. If anyone has any questions or comments or remarks to make, the floor is open. We'll be moving to the discussion, comment question section right now. If there's no one as of now, we can go ahead with the discussion section. Dr. Longkumer, I'd like to start with a question. You talk about an instance where the Indian Council of Philosophical Research cancelled a talk on the topic Rethinking Religious Pluralism and the Relationship Between Religions in 2018. And how this cancellation of the seminar demonstrates that any attempt to treat the two separately is squelched or even silenced. How do you conceive of the way in which the Hindutva narrative sort of conflates and treats the two as one?
Sorry, Akamjung, your audio is not the clearest. Can you just repeat the last point again?
Yes, sure. How do you conceive of the way in which the Hindutva narrative conflates and treats the two as one?
The what as one?
Religious pluralism and the relationship between religions.
Okay, right, okay. Sorry, the audio is a bit it's a bit like weak, so I'm just so I mean I do apologize if I haven't understood the question fully, but I think I know what you mean, and I talk about that that kind of like question about like religious pluralism and the cancellation of the seminar. And I think part of what I was trying to get at was primarily in terms of tribal like religions, right? So the panel was canceled primarily, on the pretext that there were a couple of presenters, okay, from from the like northeast of India talking about tribal religion, and I suspect what they did was that they canceled the seminar because they don't recognize those tribal religions as separate religions, okay? So they treat that as part of Hinduism. So their point is that how can you have a debate about religious pluralism, okay, when these tribal religions are not, say, like religions in their own right? A debate about tribal or a debate about, say, like religious pluralism can only happen when there are different religions. So, like, for instance, I mean, if you were to have a conference on, say, kind of Hinduism, Islam, like Buddhism, and say like Judaism, then that will constitute as having a conference on religious pluralism. But if you have a conference on tribal religion and Hinduism, say for instance, then that is not pluralism, because they see all of these tribal religions as strands of Hinduism. So it's not different; it's the same. So that is the point that they are getting to, and I talk about this a lot in the third chapter, where I talk about indigenous religions and how the Hindu right are trying to construct their notion of these kind of indigenous religions, which are non-Christian. They have to align with Hinduism or kind of Hindu practices or kind of this kind of Hindu understanding. So they argue that Hinduism is animistic like tribal religions because they like venerate the trees, the stones, the rivers, the ancestors. They also like venerate, say, like Naga ancestors. And so why can't the like Nagas also like venerate their ancestors? So they try and open it up and they try and make it as expansive as possible so that even the tribal people and their practices can be incorporated within Hinduism. And of course, Hinduism is quite expansive in that sense. I mean, this is like nothing like new. Okay, I mean, Hinduism has a tendency to kind of incorporate and then hierarchize it. So tribal practices are not a contradiction. Okay, I mean, if you were to include them within Hinduism. So that is the reason why they canceled that seminar. But that tells us something really interesting about their ideology and their way of thinking, because these tribal religions cannot be separate from Hinduism. Therefore, we cannot talk about religious pluralism.
Thank
Was that okay?
you,
Well,
Dr. Umar, for that.
did I answer that?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
There's someone in the chat who's given a question. It's from S.
Mhm.
He or she says, I have always had an interest in the actions of Hindu missionaries in the 18th and 19th centuries in the so-called Northeast region, especially regarding why they took interest in certain groups like the Métis and refrained from other groups like the present-day Naga tribes. Would you kindly give some thoughts on that?
Okay. Right. I mean, that's an interesting question, I think. And you could even say, like, reverse that, the two, say, like Métis and like Nagas, especially, if you take into consideration the Christian like missionaries, because the Christian like missionaries like focused more on the hill tribes than the valley people. So they tended to not work so much with the like Métis, but more with the Nagas. So yeah, that's interesting. Um, yes, I think the spread. I mean, I'm not very familiar with this historical period, and I don't know much about the the kind of Hindu like missionaries in the like Meitei kind of areas. But I do know that the like Meiteis were influenced a lot by the like Vaishnava traditions, coming primarily from like Bengal, Assam, and that kind of trajectory. And so, yeah, I think it is quite interesting. So I think you might know more than I do about the Hindu like missionaries. I mean, I know primarily about the contemporary scene and with the Hindutva actors, not so much of the traditional like Hindu missionaries. But I suspect that one of the reasons why they had access to the say the kind of Meiteis is primarily because of the kind of centralized power of the kingdom kind of at that time. And in Hinduism, as well as like Buddhism, tends to kind of associate quite closely with the powers, and that kind of symbolic power, that sacred power that they get from the state association actually gives them a lot of capital, and a lot of the state kind of rituals and all are performed under those auspices. um with the groups like Nagas, I think it's quite interesting. I don't know if you've come across James C. Scott's book, The Art of Not Being Governed. So I would encourage you to kind of look at that if you haven't. So the point that he makes is that civilization cannot climb hills, and that's his argument, right? So the Sanskritic like tongue, and these different valley kind of religions like Hinduism or like Buddhism, etc., cannot really penetrate, like as you go up a certain altitude, all right? And that's his argument. And of course, you can question that. So I think it is quite interesting that maybe Hinduism were not really kind of interested in the hill populations, primarily because they were quite inaccessible. I mean, it was very difficult to go to these kind of villages up in the up in the hills and the like and the like mountains. Even like nowadays, with the terrible like roads, especially in like Nagaland, trying to get to like villages is such a difficult process, right? I mean, you have to plan an entire day of just driving. So kind of imagine, I mean, if you didn't have cars or if you didn't have any of the, just walking through the thicket, the jungle, was a very difficult process. So I think access was also very, very hard. But also, I think what James C. Scott kind of argues is that, a lot of the hill peoples were actually trying to evade the like valley states. So they saw no use, I mean, in them associating themselves with the kind of like valley populations and the practices. So I suspect, it could be part of. I suspect it could be part of that process of how the kind of inaccessible terrain, the ideology of the hill people, say like the like Nagas, but on the other hand, it is quite interesting that like Christianity had success in the hill areas. And the question is, why is that so? Why didn't Hinduism or like Buddhism, say from like Burma, have an impact, in the hill areas? And why did Christianity? And I suspect that is also because of the difference in identity that like Christianity provided. It wasn't like the like Valley Hindu or kind of Buddhist practices, but I think it gave the hill people a different cosmology to interact with. And subsequently, after Indian independence, primarily, you see the spread of this, right? Because it was kind of anti-state, kind of like religion, and to some extent, that really appealed to a lot of the like hill tribes because they were used to being independent and kind of used to being free, and to associate themselves with the kind of religion of the state or the like majority like religion was often a problem and a challenge. So I hope I've kind of answered your question a bit. I mean, I'm not particularly an expert, or I'm not really sure about a lot of the Hindu like missionary activities in the 18th and like 19th centuries. But but I'm just trying to make a couple of general points.
Maybe regarding the way in which Christianity gives a very different identity as opposed to maybe a tribal or Hindu Indic sort of identity. The song explicitly links Christianity with Westernization, and they claim that these two forces have had a detrimental effect on the Nagas. They accuse Christianity's association with, say, Western ideals has meant a lot of loss of original culture, they say. What are your views on these claims, and how would you dissect what they're saying?
Good question, I think, and I think it's interesting that a lot of us are talking about decolonizing, right? Decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing this, decolonizing that, and Black Lives Matter, I think, has really propelled a lot of these kind of discussions. And I think to a large extent, the Sangh Parivar are also decolonizing. They're decolonizing the West and provincializing the West. And I think in that sense, we also have to take that into account. And in that sense, they're decolonizing Naga Christianity because they think that the like Naga's association with Christianity is a form of like Westernization. And same with the Khasis, same with the same with the like Mizos. I mean, they often talk about these Christian populations and how like Westernized they are, right? So the Khasis, the Mizos, and the like Nagas, they have the like latest like fashion, jeans, t-shirt. They they like listen to the like latest music from glam rock in the 80s to like Nirvana and all of that in the like 90s. I don't know like what kind of like music you guys are into, but I was into them. So the thing is, what they are saying is that all of these cultural forces are from the West, and they are associated, and people take them on, and somehow they think that because we have taken on Christianity, we take on these Western cultural influences. And because of that, we have forgotten our ancestral traditions. So, and I think to a certain extent they are right, I think. So, I mean, if you take into account our, say, like languages, well, I hope, all of you can speak your like mother tongue. But some of my friends in my, say, like generation could not speak their like mother tongue because it was primarily like Nagamese or English. And so they decry that, right? And a lot of people don't know their say their like stories, from the village, or how the clan comes about, what's the story of my tribe, what's the story of my ancestors, or even think about the like festivals. I mean, how many of you know your tribal festivals, the stories behind these festivals? So I think to a certain extent, they're also right that we have kind of not abandoned, but I think we've given importance to other things. So I mean, education is one of these other things, right? And of course, like St. Stephen's College is, of course, like one of the best. And all the investment that your parents have made for you to reach here is a kind of Westernization, and that's how they see it. But so the point is that Christianity's association with Western culture has come about because of the forces of these missionaries, these American-like missionaries, or the Welsh or the English, and they brainwashed us, right, into thinking that their religion and also their way of life is more important, okay, is more attractive. So what the Sangha are saying is that it's okay for you to embrace Christianity, but not with their cultural baggage, not with their kind of westernization. Okay. So be a Christian, but be a national Christian, be a Naga Christian, be a Khasi Christian, or like Mizo Christian, aware of your cultural roots. And they have a broader notion of Hindutva in the sense is that Hindutva is anybody who recognizes the importance of the soil. So once you start recognizing the importance of the soil and its association with, say, like rituals, harvests, your clothes, your like mekhlas, your shawls, your stories, then you become a patriotic Indian, okay? Because your kind of allegiance is within the soil. It's not somewhere else. You know, it's not in America, or it's not in, say, like Britain and the cultural forms, or even Arirang in, the whole like Korean like wave is now like coming, right? So, so it's to avoid being kind of involved in all of that. So, for them, I give an example of these cognac girls, in that chapter, and these cognac girls are from like rural areas in, say, like Nagaland in the east, in the eastern areas, and they are sponsored by the Sangh Parivar, the RSS, and they're taken to an RSS hostel in like UP. And these cognac girls are quite like modern. They wear, like jeans, etc., etc. But then they go to this RSS hostel, and then they they like refuse to partake, in like morning activities, like puja and everything like that, right? Because it's not their way of life. I mean, their parents have said to them that, oh, if you do puja, well, that's Hindu. So they tell this RSS Pracharak that, look, we can't participate in these like rituals because my parents have said that, if I do them, I'll go to hell, right? Classic, Christian understanding, right? So which is okay. So that's their understanding. So they tell this guy, and this guy says to them, look, if you do puja, it doesn't mean that you become Hindu. Okay, so for him, well, Hindu is the civilizational identity. It's a kind of ethnic identity, right? So if you eat prasad, it's not that well, you'll go straight to like hell. These are outward practices. Okay, they are outward practices. Inside, you remain a true Christian. Okay, you read the Bible, you pray, but outwardly you participate because these are the cultural forms available. So he tells them that, and he gives an example of his own kind of identity that he, well, he is an RSS, but he reads the Bible every day. Well, he attends church, when he can. So it doesn't mean that he becomes a Christian by just reading the Bible and attending church. So he comes back again after, say, 10 months or so, and then he tells me the story that the cognac like girls finally got it, because they started to like wear their like mekhlas and abandon their jeans, and they started to like wear like saris and salwar kameez and all of that, right? And they, attend puja, and they bring prasad to this RSS pracharak, and he says they finally got it because practicing these forms does not make you kind of Hindu in a sense of Hinduism. It makes you Hindu in a sense of a civilizational identity. And inwardly, you stay a Christian, you pray to Jesus, you attend church, you read the Bible. As long as the two don't come into conflict, you're fine. And that's their understanding of a true, kind of original and authentic, a homegrown type of Christianity, and not that associated with the West. And that's where they critique this kind of westernization stroke like Christianity. Mm. Did that answer your question, Akam?
Yes, sir. Okay.
So, sir, there's one question in the chat box. If you should I read
Okay, yeah, yeah.
should I read them out,
Okay.
or will you,
No,
or
it's
just
okay.
like okay, okay, okay.
It's okay. I can like read it. I think everybody kind of has access to the chat box, right? And I think you can all see it.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think social demographic cleavages are points of advantage for the saffron champions to seek in the possible measure to further saffron direction? Ah, thank you, Unmilan, right? I mean, Unmilan, is that right? Okay. Um, um, yeah, the like NEDA, the big problem in our like region. No, it's not a problem, but it's an interesting alliance, I think. Um, so see, the term saffronization, well, it was coined by people in the 70s and 80s talking about the saffron like wave, right, spreading all over India, and especially in the like 90s when they they like mobilized against the Ram Temple and everything, well, in Ayodhya and in all of those activities that you're aware of, right? So the saffronization process is what exactly saffronization, right? I mean, is it a structural form of, I mean, is it structural, in its like movements as it spreads through all of these like regions? And do people kind of adopt the saffron flag, the RSS flag, and they become saffronized in that sense? So I think the term saffronization, I think, needs to be treated with some caution, because do we mean just a blowing of the like wind, the saffron like wave, and it passes on, or are we talking about saffronization as a deep investment in the like region that gets people to think like the RSS, the BJP, and so on and so forth? Okay, so that's the kind of distinction that I would be quite careful about like making, and I think we have to be quite aware of how we think about saffronization, particularly in terms of alliances and politics. So like NEDA, is this alliance, right? This kind of democratic alliance, which was established by primarily by the like BJP and other like regional actors as a non-Congress front. Okay, so to challenge the Congress hegemony. And of course, in the last 10 to 15 years, we have seen the kind of dissipation of like Congress, like completely. I mean, Assam was the last, I think, and even kind of Assam, well, it's gone now, right? So it's the like BJP. I think like Tarun Gogoi was the last CM. So I think it's quite interesting. So the NEDA, I mean, I think it works primarily, as a tool for the like BJP to really pick and choose its allies. So take, for example, like Nagaland, right? We have the two parties, the NDPP and the NPF. Okay, the two regional parties. The Nagaland Democratic People's Front, I think, is the NDPP. The current like government with like Rio and all, and the NPF, the Naga People's Front, is the kind of older party with like Shorozale, and of course like Rio was also there, but he left, right? So both of these parties are part of like NEDA. Okay, they are part of the like BJP alliance. But the like BJP played politics and chose the NDPP over the NPF. Okay, though both the parties were actually kind of almost equal in their seats. So it's interesting how the kind of the like NEDA functions as a BJP front almost. Okay, same with like Meghalaya. It's so interesting that the NPP, it was a Congress that got the like largest of the votes, right? but it was the governor appointed by the like BJP, RSS, and all of that, that called on the NPP, the gosh, I mean, I can't remember, you know, all of the political names now. But so many acronyms, right? So the NPP was kind of invited by the governor to form the party, and I think it was only around 2 or 3 seats they had, but supported by the like BJP, and so they became the party in power because of that like NEDA. So it's interesting, and same with like Manipur as well. I mean, Congress was actually the kind of majority, right? Remind me if I'm wrong, but then it was like BJP and allies and all of that that formed the like government, and it was also the, you know, it was also the governor, like at that time was Acharya, I think, you know, this RSS chap, and who was also the governor of like Nagaland. So that kind of alliance, I think, is quite kind of interesting. Now, in terms of saffronization, I don't think, well, at this moment, I don't think it's saffronization. I think it's a politics of convenience. I think if you take into account the different political parties, they change according to the synergies of the center and the like region, right? So, I mean, Arunachal is a classic example of this. So it was a Congress party when the Congress were in power. And once the like BJP came to power, they completely switched, and they, you know, all of them became like BJP. And that synergy, I think, is important. But of course, you know, there are exceptions. I mean, Assam is an exception, because it was the like BJP that came to power, a proper party. Same with Tripura. I think, you know, it's also a kind of the BJP really fought the elections and beat the CPIM, and they also allied with the IPFT, the kind of Indigenous Peoples Front of Tripura. So I think there are several stories to be told, and I don't think it's just the one-way street of just kind of looking at saffronization, but it's also how different regional parties you know, are also playing the political game, and they're associating with those in power. See, I think, you know, any large group with so many like resources and so many capital can exploit any situation. And I think, so I mean, I wouldn't say that, you know, the Sangh Parivar are being kind of immensely successful in penetrating every facet of like Northeastern society. You know, I don't think that's the case. I think they have started it and that they're doing it quite well. And I think the next 10 years or so, I think will be important to see how that flows. But of course, I mean, like any party, they take kind of advantage of the fragmentations, the conflicts, and they exploit that. So I mean, it's not that they're completely like innocent in all of this. So I think the cleavages are being exploited, but the possible measures to counter the saffron kind of aggression is primarily, I think, down to regional parties. Um, and and people were saying that, you know, this whole notion of like NEDA, to some extent, you know, is a front for the like BJP to exert its power and influence. But people were also saying that the only way one can counter the like BJP, and indeed even the Congress, is to like regionalize the politics to such an extent that you have the coming together of regional parties like the NPF or the MNF or the IPFT or the AGP. But of course, the AGP are kind of aligned with the like BJP. So it's to kind of like regionalize, and that's where I think you can really counter the forces of national politics. And I think to a certain extent, yes. I mean, like Northeast is a small this electoral map, right? I mean, if you compare it to say like UP or elsewhere, I mean, Assam is the state with the like largest number of MPs. I think it's only 12 or so. And if you take into account, say, a place like UP with 70, 80 like kind of like MPs, you know, how can we compete with all of that? But I think the key is to kind of like regionalize, but the key is also solidarity across the like region. I think we need to work together with the other like regions in the like Northeast to really kind of regionalize and bring back this kind of vernacular like democracy and like vernacular like movements. Should I answer the next question? Yes, thank you for that question, Kalita. And the next one is like Emeralda Taba, is that right? Sorry if I'm not pronouncing your names right. With the BJP being in central power, there is increasing financial investment, both politically and socially by the IRS, especially when it comes to social service during the pandemic. Will this financial edge in any way exacerbate the possibility and sympathy towards the Hindu religion itself? Yes, I think so. And I think the RSS have kind of invested in, can I request people to put on their like video if that's possible so that I can see some faces and not talk to blank screens? Thanks. Thank you so much. Yeah, I know it's, well, I mean, it takes up a lot of the internet traffic, but just to see some faces is nice. I think so, yes. And I think I think Hindutva and the RSS are really trying to work with the like Northeast kind of organizations. I don't know if you guys are aware of this or not, but the RSS was calling out for people experiencing like racism in the like Northeast. I mean, during the first lockdown, you know, around say, I don't know, April, June, I think. And the call out was on like WhatsApp. You know, even I like received that you know, if anybody from the like Northeast are being targeted for people thinking that you are Chinese and that you are spreading the like virus, to contact the RSS. And so I think, see, I mean, the RSS are quite careful in how they are like managing this, right? And they are actually helping a lot of like Northeasterners. And of course, I have not experienced this, so I cannot say, but the people who have been receiving the help have made like videos. And now, how many of you have come across this like video made by, I think like Naga, I think, Hangami guy, I think, if I'm not mistaken. In like Nagamis talking about the pandemic and how it is to be a like Northeasterner in like Delhi and the kinds of like racism that he has been experiencing and how the RSS have actually come and helped him. So they bring food for him, okay, and they protect him, and it's really, really interesting. And he's talking about how, you know, we think that the RSS are all kind of out to get us, right? They're out to saffronize all of us. But he was saying that just take into account the kind of social services that they've given us kind of Northeasterners in like Delhi. And so let's work with them and let's be kind towards them. You know, let's not like bash them up, you know, if we see them in Kohima or in like Dimapur, you know, because in all of them, you know, all of our actions are going to come back to haunt us, right? So what if they start targeting us as well because of the actions of the few in say like Northeast? So it's a quite an interesting like revelation, and just to hear that from someone from the inside who is telling out telling, all these from WhatsApp like users, about his experience, I thought was quite interesting, and it does really showcase the importance of this kind of discussion that we are having. And I don't know if any of you have experienced any of this in say like Delhi, and it would be quite interesting to hear your points as well.
Thank you for that, Dr. Longkumer. Regarding revelation and maybe the ways in which politics and religion is sort of linked together, in your book, in the chapter Prophecy and the Hindu State, um, uh, it concerns with how religion and politics are so intermingled. It is often said that politics and religion should not mingle. Yet there is a huge influx of, say, religious beliefs, say prophecies, in the demand for a different nation. Is this feasible in your opinion, and why?
Good question. I think that religion and politics are sticky topics, aren't they? Because people don't want to talk about it, because then you start fighting with each other. Um, I think the separation of church and state, the separation of, say, like religion and politics, is a very European idea that comes from this enlightenment that like religion is the cause for conflict, so we should separate it from the state. Okay, so at home you pray and you do your kind of religious practices, but don't bring it to the state. Now, kind of ironically, I mean, India is like one of the states that constitutionally kind of argues for the separation of church and state, for the state and like religion, right? Well, of course, you guys are aware of this, but in practice, it never happens. So, think about the ways in which people have separated church and state. Okay, so in Britain, church and state are not separate. The Queen is still the constitutional head of the state and the church. But in practice, they're very separate. Okay, church cannot kind of intervene in politics. In America, church and state are separate constitutionally, but in practice, it's not. So I think there are numerous examples. I mean, even if you take into account Indonesia, the state tells you what sort of official kind of religion that people should be following and what are kind of recognized as official. So this idea of the church and state, the suspicion of the church and state, is actually not really something which is in practice implemented, because we see it being there in every aspect of political. I mean, India right now is the perfect example of how the separation is not happening. They're building a Hindu like nation state. So I think the prophecy material, and I this chapter was the most difficult chapter to write, because so the chapter is looking at prophecy like materials, and anybody from the like Northeast, and especially from the hill, say like Christian areas, will know that prophecy is a very important part of everyday like life, right? I mean, people prophesy left, right, and center. I mean, it's there on, say, like WhatsApp. I often get prophecy like materials on my like WhatsApp as well from my parents at home. That we need to pray for X number of like days because someone has prophesied that X, Y, and Z will happen. Okay, so I mean, I came across this group, the Sumi Alikishi Kigami, and they were telling me about these prophecy materials that they prophesy, and it's primarily about the Indian state, and they send copies of that, of their prophecy. They fax it and send it to the Prime Minister's office. And I was going, how do you do that? I mean, like, but anyways, but they do it because God tells them to. Now, that statement itself is quite powerful. I mean, so of course, you can say like dismiss it and say, come on, You know, does God really speak to you? And so to take that seriously and to really think about that in terms of how is this materialized? What are the kind of like motivations, and why are these people invested in the Indian nation state? Because what they are arguing, you know, in these prophecy like materials is that, and they call them prophecy files because each of the prophecy are typed properly, you know, in their kind of this kind of lettered like heads, and they are circulated in the press, and they are circulated to like governments, the state government as well as the national government. And these prophecies are like the Old Testament idea of the Exodus. And when like Moses confronts the Pharaoh, the state, you know, at that time, of course, the Egypt, you know, was that state, right, the empire. And when he says to like Pharaoh that, you know, if we don't set our people free, then, you know, all of these will happen, right? So kind of locusts will come, uh, children will die, you know, etc. So these prophecy files are exactly of that like mold. They're confronting the state, and the state here is the Hindu state, right? Like BJP, and to some extent even the Congress. So they confront the state by telling them that if you don't set the like Nagas free, then this is what is going to happen, right? India will fragment, or the prime minister will have a plane crash, right? So it's quite precise into how they are constructing these narratives. And importantly, we also have to take into account fulfillment of these prophecies. And these prophecies are being fulfilled through interpretation. So certain things have happened because the Indian state have not done X. And so the prophecy stuff, it goes back to, you know, earlier times in the 50s and 60s. I mean, there was a like Descent Tagore. I don't know like whether you've heard of well, I mean, him or not, but so I mean, he was a Hindu and then he becomes a Christian, and he really starts to kind of understand the like Naga issue, and then he calls the like Nagas the Israel of India, and he has written this mad, I think, like book. It's called Israel in India, and where he talks about stuff like prophecy, Exodus, in Old Testament, and it really rings true actually if you really think about it. And so a lot of the prophecy materials are drawn from this long durée of historical like, development. It's not that, you know, I've just sort of picked up like something and say, okay, right, you know, I'm going to like write about it. But it was something that I heard, you know, ever since I was small, and I kept thinking, why are these prophecies important? So prophecy here is about knowledge, right? What can, so say you pick up a like newspaper. I mean, it gives you like knowledge, information about world events. But why can't prophecy also do that? Why can't, say, dreams and like visions tell us about things which are about to come, right? So it gives us that kind of knowledge. And I was really kind of interested in indigenous knowledge because, you know, a lot of these prophecies are kind of dismissed even by the churches, even by the like Nagas and others, that it's very fringe, but it's a way of mediating knowledge. And I think that is where, you know, I was really, really interested in alternative forms of history. You know, I wasn't interested in the established like historical things that, you know, we are taught and we often like learn, right? So I mean, if you start with a, say, I mean, history of Assam, then you get this boom boom boom. You start with the history of like Nagaland, you get boom 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 boom. You have to start with the NNC, you have to speak about like Fizo. But I mean, I wanted to question all of that, you know, I wanted to trouble that by giving an alternative view of history from the very, very fringes, from prophecy like material, and how they constantly challenge the state.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Longkumer. We've gone out of time, but we'd just like to take one more question, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
It's given in the chat box. S says,
Yeah.
would you also kindly comment on the more subtle saffron forays, like in terms of iconography, for For example, the co-opting of Lachit Borphukan by the right, or the reimagination of the Kripa woman as Bharat Mata in the last elections.
Yeah. See, this iconography, I mean, I do talk about that, and I think Akram has like read the book. So if you know, in one of the chapters, in chapter 6, in particular, so I talk about iconography, and I talk about how the icon of like Rani Gaidinlu, okay, and of course this like Lachit is also kind of like used, and the idea of like Bharat Mata is also used with the tribal like women like holding the flag and the like lion, you know, that the classic image of like Bharat Mata is being transposed, or tribal like women are being photographed, you know, in that same pose as say like Bharat Mata. So this is called the kind of, well, I mean, it's something which has already been established. It's called the spatialization or the strategy of spatialization, all right? And how they are spatializing these kind of icons across the like you know, across the landscape. So Lachit Borphukan, of course, is an important part of this because he is seen as this quintessential Assamese who fought the kind of Muslim invaders, right? And of course, here the like Muslims are the other. So he's treated as this like national like figure that fought against the invaders. Same with like Rani Gaidinlu, that she opposed the Christians, the foreign invaders, and therefore she is seen as this important kind of icon. And in fact, in the 2015 birth centenary celebrations of Rani Gaidinlu, I don't know like how much, well, I mean, how many of you are aware of that, but there was a celebration that happened all over like Northeast as well as in like Delhi. And so it was in that event that like Modi, of course, was invited, and of course he knows like the story of Rani Gaidinlu, also like knows her, and he calls her the like mother of the nation. So I mean the speech is in Hindi, and it's like really interesting that, you know, he calls her like Ma, like someone who would address like mother. And the story is that when Rani Gaidinlu in the 70s and 80s would travel all over India to be a part of, you know, events and everything like that, invited by the RSS and the VHP, she went to like Gujarat on the invitation by the RSS, I think, to give a few talks and, you know, to interact with the civil organizations and all of that. So in that trip, she comes across, or the person who is hosting her and taking her around happens to be Narendra Modi, because like Modi was a Pracharak. And he then really starts to learn about her story. I mean, who is she, you know, and the extent, I mean, people may not be aware of this, but the extent of like veneration for like Rani Gaidinlu all over India, aside from like Northeast or pockets of like Northeast, say in Assam or like Manipur, parts of like Nagaland, people, they come to pilgrimage. They come to pilgrimage to like Lankau, to her like village, and they have textbooks about her. I mean, they're primarily in Hindi, but they're taught to every student in these RSS hostels, you know. So her iconography, this person, this icon, is such an important part of this. And same with other like figures. I mean, like, you know, I talk primarily about like Rani Gaidinlu, but there are also others. I mean, there's Thalum Rugba in kind of Arunachal, the chap who was the main person who starts to come up with like Donyo Polo in like Mizoram, and there is a figure I saw called like Mizo, like Rani, and I'd never heard of her. So I was asking what, you know, my friends, and here I'm sure, I mean, some of you like might kind of enlightened me as well. And who is she? I wasn't quite kind of aware of that. In Assam, of course, there are kind of others in Tripura as well, like Manipur as well. So, I mean, all of these icons are an important part of this spatializing to really give a sense of the connections of this region to the national narrative. Okay, so I mean, they are interested in figures that have really resisted colonialism from the British kind of time onwards, or even back to the kind of Mughal like period when the like Muslim hegemony was coming and was spreading all over India. And who are these people who resisted these foreign invaders? And these are the people that we celebrate. Okay, so people like Borpukan, like Gaidinlu, Mizorani, right? I mean, all of these figures are an important part of this national story.
Okay, sir. I'm sorry to disturb, but like I have one last question that I really wanted to ask for like it's about Rani Kaindu and about uh, the collective memory of let's say the indigenous people, the Nagas, or even the Zeliang people. Like how do they remember Rani Kaindu, right? And so I was talking to people and like even among my Zeliang friends, they often say like, oh, she used to practice black magic, and when you say black magic, it comes with a lot of normative baggage, especially in the Northeast, especially in the Christian parts of Manipur or even Nagaland. And so her image and the issues that she fought for are like, for example, fighting for a Zeriano homeland within the Indian framework stand in direct contrast to the NNC's agenda. So I wanted to ask one question about how do we sort of reclaim Rani Gainilu without giving in to the nationalist narrative, without sort of uh by resist how to resist that sort of I don't know how to put it in words now. I mean but yeah, if you get my point.
Yeah.
And
Yes, and I think that's a good point. And I think I have been researching about like guiding you for many years now. Ever since I started my PhD on the Haraka, just she keeps coming back. And I think in my first book, I really try and give an image of her as a Zeliang Grong, okay, as a like Rongmai who is so close to her people, especially the Zeme in Haflong area, right? So I really try and not kind of Hinduize her at all. But of course, Hinduization of uh, Rani Gaiden has happened. And so Hindus often, or the RSS often see her as Durga, okay? And they see her as a powerful like woman, okay? And like leading this like movement, fighting the kind of NNC and all of that. And I think to a certain extent, Guiding Liu is really caught, I think, because on the one hand, she is trying to really project a kind of indigenous form of practices that can resist the dominant Christian, say like missionaries and the spread happening in the 50s and 60s and onwards. But she is really trying to construct a very indigenous cosmology, a very localized form of practices that will be relevant to her people at that time. And I think, I try to tell that story, but what has happened is that, unfortunately, different groups have taken on her kind of image, okay? So the Christians see her as this like devil, right? And the Hindus see her, as this like Bharat Mata, like Durga, right? And they celebrate her. And I think even amongst the Zeliangrong people, now one has to remember that she was not very popular amongst her own people. Okay, so the like Rongmai for many years were quite suspicious about her own activities because a lot of them also became Christian. And so she was in the fringes, but now it seems to me that she has become this icon for the Zeliangrong, regardless of what practice, right? Well, you could be, say, like Haraka, Tinkorogwan Chapriyak, like Christian, it doesn't really like matter. She is seen as this emblem of Zeliangrong identity. And so I think there are different versions of her. And I think, but my version, which I love the best, and I have like written about this in an article. I don't know if you'd be interested to see. I mean, it's open access, is available. It's called like Lines That Speak. So I talk about the artifacts in the like museum in the Pitt Rivers in Oxford. When I take it back, and then people tell me stories about her and how she kept in all these like notebooks and she scribbled, and so that's the like version of the story that I like to tell, because I like to tell her, within the context of the Zeliangrong people, that she is not someone who is, say, like universally admired, but she, as a personality, as someone with that kind of stature, people like her, people don't like her, people are unsure of her, right? So all of these opinions are there. But I like the way in which the Zemi Haraka in particular really remember her and talk about her. And I think that's the story that needs to be told. Mm.
And sir, another question. Like, so, I found it quite ironic that, for example, like, we don't like, at least the identity, or like how indigenous people in Northeast remember their ancestors as warriors or as headhunters. It's in direct, like, it goes in contrast to how we look down on certain traditional practices, or the stuff that Rani Gandhi advocated for as being satanic, or as being anti-Christian. But if you think about it, like, like, I mean, the the headhunting and the traditional practices do are parts of a whole. But I do feel that if I were to choose one, I would prefer to go for the traditional practices. So I wanted to know, like, how did we come to the point that we chose to sort of just choose that headhunting part of our identity and sort of make it make it the identifying part, make it the core feature of our identity and how we remember our past, sort of.
So are you advocating for the coming back of headhunting?
No, I'm not advocating for coming back on identity. Yeah, yeah. I'm just confused as to, like, how, like, like, how did we sort of privilege that masculine narrative of our identity and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point. I think, um, see, again, speaking from, as a like Naga, and of course the like Naga context, the like Naga men are seen as the guardians of the land, right? In customary law, in, a lot of the like martial traditions, in head hunting, in all of that. I think that needs to be questioned, I think. But also, I think this whole notion of head hunting, I think we have to be quite careful about how we are talking about head hunting, because yes, we had wars and we took heads, but I think headhunting, the notion of headhunting is also a construction primarily by the colonial forces to really exotify us, to like make us into savages, as it were. And by making us into savages, they have to civilization, or bring civilization to us, right? To civilize us. And so I think people were not head hunting in the sense that you were constantly hunting for heads. I mean, I don't think that was the case. I think people took heads in certain situations. And so I think we need to be aware of that. And I think it's a history filled with a lot of anxiety. I think people don't want to talk about it because it's a very personal issue as well, right? Because say, people talk about, oh, you took my great grandfather's head, and so so I think that kind of issue is, I mean, is there. Um, well, I mean, I'm no kind of historian, or I don't know what happened when headhunting was like banned. But I think it did bring a lot of relief, I think, to the people. And I think people were really eager to abandon that practice because it brought about a lot of fear and anxiety. And I think maybe that was a good part of our culture, which was abandoned. But like, see, I mean, any culture, okay, like any culture goes through periods or goes through processes of evolution and innovation. There are certain things we abandon, certain things we keep, so on, right? So that part of the kind of evolution and culture changes, I think. And I think right now we are, at a very, very important part of our like history, I think, where the like masculine image of certain cultures need to be questioned and challenged, I think, because it does not speak to our times. Okay, so and I hope it changes because cultures evolve. It changes, and I think no culture will survive. It was stagnant. Okay, so I think that process of change, and I think it's up to the like Nagas, up to the Mizos, up to the Khasis, like Garos, Assamese, whatever, to kind of embrace what needs to be changed at that time. Okay, and it's up to the people to make those choices.
Um, okay, with that, I think we will close this session. We went way past the allotted time, but I think it shows how pertinent these questions and ideas are to engage in dialogue and conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Longkumer, for sparing some time in your busy schedule and for enlightening us this afternoon. We all have learned a lot and take away so much to share with the people we know and even engage in dialogue with our friends, parents, and our relatives. Thank you so much once again. Thank you to the society for hosting and making this event a reality. And a big thank you for those of you who have carved an hour and a half of your time to join us this evening and learn with all of us. Thank you once again and have a good evening.
And thank you
Thank
for
you,
inviting
sir.
and for your patience
Thank you,
in our
sir.
and really helpful questions. And it was great to kind of discuss it with you guys as well. So keep in touch, and I mean, hopefully see you guys around.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.